Okay, welcome back. We're going to begin the second session of the NEPA assignment follow-up webinar training. This one is focused on changing practices related to document management, tracking, filing, making sure that we're holding things to the appropriate document retention schedules, making things accessible, things like that. This session's pretty short. We'll get through it pretty fast. The first initial slides are going to kind of be a little boring. It's going to talk about what the requirements are, how we're meeting these things. And I don't want folks to check out. What I want you guys to understand is that there's really nothing new, different, or exciting about this process. We at FDOT have no problems creating project files, storing records, creating and supporting the administrative records. There's nothing new, different, or interesting about any of this stuff. There are some little nuances for making sure that we have the protocols in place, we have the appropriate naming conventions in place so that we can have consistency across the districts and that we can provide access to the files to FHWA within 5 days when they make a request. But other than that, trying to make things a little more accessible and store things in a consistent way, we do this. You guys do this today. You've done it in the past, and we're going to continue to do it in the future. So the beginning part of this presentation is going to focus on some of the boring stuff, the regulations and the protocols and the file naming conventions. And then the end of this portion of the presentation, I'll give you a demo on some of the things that we've developed within SWEPT, that Statewide Environmental Project Tracker application, to kind of make everybody's lives a lot easier. It's going to handle a lot of the storage into the electronic document management system. It's going to handle the naming conventions we're going to talk about. It's going to handle, dealing with access for FHWA upon request. It's going to deal and manage with the retention schedules and when we might need to dispose of the files. Okay, so the next section is the NEPA assignment, tracking, filing, and records management piece, and we'll go through that. Purpose of this particular training, we're going to talk about the requirements of data management and retention. We're going to show maintaining the project file in SWEPT, retrieving those documents, and then we'll show you ways that have a tool that's already been created within SWEPT that's accessible to the environmental staff, the project managers, as well as legal that helps organize the administrative record. Before I jump off, the one thing you see down here, down at the bottom, the NEPA Assignment MOU, these are the requirements right out of the NEPA Assignment MOU that is executed by our department and FHWA. As Eric will discuss later on, before we head to lunch towards the end of the session today, we have self-assessments as well as FHWA audits that we would expect for the first 4 years. They'll be using this NEPA assignment MOU as basically the blueprint for what they would come in and expect from our agency relative to compliance with the NEPA regulations, laws, and obviously what we've agreed to in the MOU. So we would expect this to be the foundation for a lot of what they come in for those audits. And we are seeing that when we talk to Texas and Ohio and California, who have already gone through this process. The first few slides you guys have already seen yesterday. This should have come up in Kathleen Tulin's presentation, where we talk about project file and administrative record, and it's just to kind of get your mind wrapped around where we're focused on. So again, looking at a document or a record, it could be anything: letters, reports, emails, meeting minutes, studies, models, guidance. It really doesn't matter the format. Could be a transcript, could be handwritten notes, could be a comment card. It's really basically anything that was considered or presented or the information was reasonably available during the process. So it's a lot, right? And then when we think about what's included in the project file, the screenshot you see on the right-hand side, there's been an update. That screenshot should be updated. It was recently redone in August 2016, but it's basically the exact same guidance from AASHTO, giving guidance on maintaining a good project file to help prepare for the administrative record in a NEPA study. So some of the things that should be in project file: your NEPA document, your technical reports, your meeting summaries, telephone calls, memos, correspondence with agencies, stakeholders, comments, responses. So I mean, it's just about everything. In contrast, if you think about what the administrative record is, if you think about the project file being the large bucket, and then you think about administrative record being a subset of that larger bucket. So your administrative record needs to be all the documents and materials directly or indirectly considered or relied on at the time that we made the final decision during the NEPA process. So it's got to have the decision documents or any documents generated or received by us during the environmental project review. This is FDOT's official record of the NEPA making decision. It's not the project file. And I'm sure Kathleen Toolin gave you guys a lot of conversation relative to the fact that, again, that project file is the much larger bucket. The administrative record is the subset. And as we walk through this presentation, we'll show you that as you're uploading documents, there's really kind of three choices where you can put it. You can put it into just the project file. You can say, I know this is project file and its administrative record, or I have a piece of information that is attorney-client privileged and should be treated as attorney work product. Maybe you got some advice from OGC or Office of General Counsel or legal staff in the district. You have the ability to make sure that that record becomes part of SWEPT, becomes part of, it's accessible when someone's looking at that file, but it's stored in a separate location as an attorney work product, so that only the appropriate folks, the district staff working on the project and the legal staff working on the project have access to that information, and it's not part of the project file and it's not part of the administrative record. So let's talk about the data management and retention requirements. And when you're looking at this, it's under NEPA Assignment Program. We're going to have to follow Florida and federal requirements for handling NEPA and related documents. These requirements really fall into kind of two categories: the records management and disposal requirements. Both FDOT and FHWA have requirements regarding the management of agency records. These requirements address issues such as the type of documents that must be filed and the process for disposing of old records. Their key policies and procedures are listed here. For FHWA, those requirements are established by agency order, and we'll actually look at some of that. And at FDOT, we have our own policies and procedures. These affect the record keeping, storage, retention, and how we manage our files during the NEPA process. And we'll go over those a little bit more detail. So that's a big long list up there. The other part of that is also access to the information, and our NEPA files are subject to public records laws, such as the Federal Freedom of Information Act and Florida's public records laws. The universe of documents that are subject to these laws is quite broad, and as a result, these laws may result in the release of documents well beyond what would typically be included in an administrative record. So for instance, a request under Florida's public records law may result in disclosure of an internal DOT document or a consultant document, that may not have qualified or should have been in the administrative record if that's all you were looking at. It's also important to note that public records requests can be received at any time, any place, by anyone. So we just have to be prepared for that. In addition, FDOT is responsible for providing FHWA with the information necessary to ensure that we're carrying out the NEPA assignment responsibilities, and as specified in our Memorandum of Understanding, we need to make those files available for inspection to FHWA within 5 business days of making that request. So you'll begin to immediately recognize why it became important for us to have a statewide environmental project tracker, to have one sort of portal where all these documents are going to live, so that we've got a consistent interface, a consistent storage, and consistent access to the files. When you look at the records management procedure, this is our FDOT procedure. It also links over to public libraries and state archives, which are over at the Department of State, which also tie into a lot of our records management practices. When we talk about retention and disposal schedule, we have to be as strict or more strict than what the requirements are by the federal government. We have mapped all the NEPA assignment records to the GS1 SL 167 retention and disposal schedule. In that disposal schedule, we'll be keeping all records for at least 5 fiscal years after the completion of the project, the reporting requirement, or other applicable activity. So this is kind of important, and the reason why this is important is if we think about what we're doing in the PD&E process and in our NEPA documents, our NEPA document may result in 1 or more projects, and we are required to keep the NEPA and all related documentation until everything that was that came out of that NEPA study is either dropped, stopped, or completed. And so we had to update our work program instructions. We've spent a lot of time working with the work program staff. They have developed some additional reports for us. And part of what we've done is there's a concept within work program called related items. And that related items is how different FMs are tied together through these specific activities. We've worked with work program to expand their related items concept to include NEPA, so that we can flag projects and FMs as NEPA and then relate them to other corresponding FMs down the line. In many cases, a project may just retain the same FM and the segments may change as it moves throughout the various phases, or additional segments are added. But in other cases, we may have completely different FMs that aren't associated other than through this related items concept. So working with work program, we've updated the instructions to include the related items concept. And now what we're looking for is if a NEPA study is completed, we have the parent FM, we track all the related or spawning FMs after that. And then through a report that's generated from our work program office and sent to us, we're looking for when every connected FM reaches a status 100. A status 100 means the project is completely closed, everybody's books are happy, everybody's been paid, there's nothing else left. And so what we're looking for is if there's one parent FM and there are 4 subordinate FMs, we're looking for the parent and the 4 subordinates to all reach status 100. Once that happens, we begin counting 5 years, and at the end of those 5 years, we will then purge the associated records. This is the records disposition manual that FHWA responds to. This is the manual that we had to make sure that we were as strict or more strict than with the standards they set forth in this particular document. We had them during the MOU process, they had to review our GS1 SL 167 and our process associated with work program and the status 100, so that their headquarters and local legal out of Atlanta had the ability to review that and verify that we, if we follow that process, that we meet the obligations as set forth in the MOU. Also in the MOU, we've got 2 CFR sections 200.333 through 200.337. These all became included in the MOU as well. Basically, they come down to topics under this rule, focus on the retention requirements for records, requests for transfer of records, the methods that we could use for collection or transmission or storage, as well as providing access to the files or restricting access to the files. So all that's in our MOU as well, and we have to demonstrate that we are meeting the compliance with those as well. In summary, FDOT has to maintain the project files as required by law. It was determined with working with FHWA headquarters legal staff that FDOT's retention program meets or exceeds the federal requirements, and that records, ultimately are going to be retained for at least 5 years following construction, or the last action. And so, it kind of goes back to what we were saying before with we're looking at the associated FMs and when they reach a status 100. So if a project never makes it to construction and the FM gets closed and there's no subordinate FMs that are open, then we begin counting that 5 years as well. There's also a requirement from FHWA that when a project is identified as a significant transportation project, all bets are off, you keep it for forever. And so we've agreed that we'll do that as well for projects that qualify. So to support all this, we have the EDMS, the Electronic Document Management System, here at the department. It is officially recognized as being able to house an official record for the department. It stores and archives the files. It has disaster recovery. It has redundancy. It does all the things that an enterprise document management system should do. Within the environmental library, we have everything, all the document groups and types mapped out to the appropriate retention and disposal schedules, and we're able to, because the documents are being stored in the electronic document management system, all the other applications that are able to pull documents from the EDMS are able to pull those documents into their systems. For instance, one most people are familiar with is the Project Suite Enterprise Edition. Project Suite has that capability where they are querying the EDMS, finding the appropriate records. Most of the time it's by FM number, and then pulling those documents in and making them accessible in that interface. So going forward, we're going to use the SWEP application to get the project files loaded, but they'll be stored in the EDMS and they'll be accessible throughout all of this other inventories of applications used by the department. So that SWEP application that Dean's going to give an update on in the next presentation after the break, it provides that connectivity, that interface to EDMS, but it integrates the project workflow. So for instance, by interacting with a SWEP application, we already know who you are, what district you're in, what project you're on, therefore what FM you're working on, and all of these things. And all of those things are attributes that you would normally have to put onto a document that you submit into the EDMS. But by interacting with a SWEP application, those attributes are already behind the scenes identified and populated without any additional work. So let's just quickly look at maintaining the project file in SWEP. We'll use SWEP to, again, look at the MOU and meet the requirements established there. We'll provide that connectivity to the EDMS. It helps us organize the project files consistently and make them accessible. When FHWA comes to audit us and they want to look at our project files, it's going to be that system that they're going to be accessing. They'll have their own window based on what it is, whatever is the scope of their audit. We will be applying consistent naming conventions and meeting that requirement where if FHWA makes a request, we have 5 days to provide them access. This is the system that's going to allow us to do that. Focusing on the document naming conventions, again, when you're working on a project within the SWEP application, we already know what FM you're working on. We know what class of action that document is. We already know what district you're in. So then we're applying the unique document name you're working with and then applying the date. So each one of those is defined on this slide. So then as a document gets pulled into another system, think of Project Suite, you can immediately look at that document. You'll have the FM, the CO, the class of action, the district, the document name, and the date. And before you even open that document, you should have a pretty good understanding of what you would expect to see in there. So on the project page itself, this is just an overview of what the project would look like. You've got some detailed information about project, this one's a test, and some information within the system. When you go down to the project documents, you can begin to interact with the files and begin to start uploading various documents within the system. It's organized in such a way to be consistent with topics and activities you would expect to encounter when you're following the PD&E manual and the NEPA process. You have the ability to come in and add more documents under an individual category. You can replace, delete, modify, send stuff over to the EDMS. In this screenshot, I'm getting ready to upload a public involvement plan, and I'm clicking on the Add New. It's going to have a little interface, just like if you were adding a file to your email, where you're going to browse, you put in a description, you put in a publication date, and then it populates it, and again, applying that consistent file naming convention standard. So as this file is submitted to the EDMS, it's populating it with all of those attributes. It's also accessible in those other systems, and without opening the file, you can tell what that file is. So just a little interaction there. If you're coming down the back side and you want to be able to access the documents, again, you're coming into the system. All these links take you to more detailed information about the project. In the upper right-hand corner, for those of you that work in the environmental screening tool, we call this box the golden search. It works just the same way. You can search for anything, any word, and it will, based on your selections, look through projects, documents, and people. If you want to look statewide, it will default to your district and then number of search results, and then quickly link you over to the projects themselves, the documents you're looking for, or in this case, people. I guess we don't have anybody with a name called road, which makes sense. In the project lists themselves, I'm looking at my projects. You can quickly navigate. You click on the link and it'll take you quickly right to that project. Another way that things are quickly accessed to get to the documents throughout the system is that the SWEP application will manage the approvals and storage. So as you get to those type 1s and someone prepares a type 1 categorical exclusion and it goes to the district environmental manager, they receive an email. Without logging into the system, they can click on the link. It'll immediately take them to that document where they can perform that activity. It works the same with everything else. So whether you're working on a type 2, an EA, an EIS, if there are specific actions or specific things you need to look at, if there's a notification that prompts that activity, then there'll be a direct link into the system that allows folks to get there. And then the last thing I wanted to cover was organizing the administrative record. This is, again, a slide from Kathleen Toolin that talked about, work early and often and maintaining your files. Because you're working within the SWEP application, you're really actively already doing this. In order to get the environmental document approved, all the documents are going to have to be loaded into the system. So you're already going to have an active. You'll already be actively working within the system, populating it as you go. Again, we talked about when you upload a document, are you uploading it to the project file? Are you uploading it to the project file and you know it should be part of the administrative record? Or is this something specific that only you and the OGC or legal staff should have access to? It would be uploaded into that folder, and it would be accessible to only folks that should have the rights to see them. So this is just an online screen interface. It's still under development, so it's not 100% right now. But let me tell you how it's organized again. We talked about folder structure. We have the administrative record, we have the project file, and then we have the attorney work product. And so within the administrative record, you have the ability to review projects in the project file, move stuff in the administrative record, review all the administrative record, move stuff out. And once the district and legal are happy with what that administrative record would be, you can export the file. And what it'll do is it'll create a color-coded, indexed spreadsheet that will lay out all of the various components of the administrative record, and then they'll have hot links and whatever description to the resulting files, and then that zip file can then be stored, sent, put on a flash drive, or expanded and burned on a DVD for submission. So again, you can actively work in here with legal staff to have a system that is smart enough to organize everything. You can you have the ability when you're working through and adding documents. So say you had correspondence and maybe you sent an email and that email went to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and it went to Army Corps of Engineers and National Marine Fisheries Service. You can upload that one file. It could be listed as correspondence and you can flag it as correspondence with National Marine Fisheries and Army Corps of Engineers and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and that one document, while being stored in one location, will actually show up in both sets. So you'd show up under correspondence, but if you looked under agency coordination and you looked at a subfolder that said Army Corps of Engineers, it would also show up there as well. And then one parting shot that I know Kat probably left you guys with, and it should be imprinted in your brains, is that if it's not in the record, it didn't happen. And it is considered the most important factor related to the administrative record. So working things early and often, actively work on your files, and hopefully within this system we're kind of reusing previous activities. You upload a document, now it's accessible in the project file and the administrative record. You put something in for review, it's already accessible in these other environments. So in summary, keep everything accurate, up to date. Super important for the success of the program. I'm going to use the SWEP tool to help you with the data management retention requirements, and that it's the PD&E district project teams that are expected to maintain those files in SWEP. Now, the way SWEP works, right, it's all roles based. So you can have DOT staff as well as consultant staff. DOT staff can only perform approvals. They cannot delegate those responsibilities to anybody who's not a DOT person. But certainly they can assign responsibilities to their consultants to be part of the daily management of the files and be the ones to prepare things. You can work with your district environmental staff who will work with us to make sure we have the right people assigned the right roles. So we've got a couple poll questions, and Ruth, I'll turn it over to you for these.
Thank you. The first poll is, which statement best summarize FDOT's retention schedule for PD&E studies? Complete this sentence: all records are retained, and pick the best answer. Got lots of voting going on right now. Up to 40%. So keep those votes coming. Just hit 60%, and they're still coming in. Okay, everybody else, just go ahead and get your votes in. I'm going to close it in a couple seconds. And I'm going to close the poll now and share the results. 77% said for at least 5 years after completing construction, and that is the correct answer. A few people said until let to construction and then purge 5 years later, and a few people said for 30 years after the record of decision. But the correct answer is for at least 5 years after completing construction. Pete?
And I think we just shift right to another poll. I think you have two more, and then we'll be open for questions.
Okay, where is the environmental file of record stored? Votes are coming in. We're up to 40%. They're coming in quick. We're up to 55% now. %. Everybody get your answers in. I'll close the poll in a couple seconds. Poll's now closed. I'll share the results. 100%. Everyone got it right. The environmental file record is the EDMS. And And on to the next one. What's the most important factor relating to the administrative record? Please select the best answer. Got 20% have voted. Answers are still coming in. Go ahead and click your best answer. Okay, it's starting to slow down. I'm going to close it in a few seconds. So click away. Okay, ready to close? And share the results. The best answer is if it's not in the record, it didn't happen, but the other two answers are fine. That it is important to start early in the process and maintain accurate files, and the records should be organized and easy to find things. But the thing that we're trying to emphasize is if it's not in the record, it didn't happen. And there are a few questions to follow up on. The first question has to do with hard copies. Since the majority of our work products are now electronically created PDFs, please address the need to create or store hard copies versus the suitability of PDF only.
Yeah, I mean, we are certainly an electronic environment. So if if the deliveries that you're receiving are already electronic files, then just like you would attach it in an email or anything else, you would upload those documents directly into SWEPT. We're not sure that we really see a need for the hard copies anymore, especially since putting these documents into the EDMS from department standards identifies that as the official record for the department. So that would be the answer. The answer is there's nothing that says any of this has to actually be printed in hard copy. You may have some instances where you might have to share things with tribes, tribal partners, or other entities that would prefer something to be in hard copy, but otherwise we're working in an electronic world. We're storing things electronically. We'll be providing access to things electronically when they go into the Federal Register or over to the National Dashboard or any place else. They're not being printed. So hopefully that answered the question. Go ahead.
Yeah. The next question is, will work program retroactively note past projects? Wait, this just hopped. For NEPA follow-on projects, or will this tracking of the 5-year retention just begin now and forward?
So because it's tied to related items, it will only be forward because somebody would not have gone in the past to identify NFM and relate it back to past PD&Es. But it is in the recently published work program instructions that just came out, I think, last month. And it has been part of the statewide meetings with the work program folks. If anybody does work with their work program staff to update related items, then obviously it would be reflected, but otherwise I think it's mostly a day forward.
The next question, and there are actually some more questions coming in. Have we received any guidelines on significant transportation project for permanent retention yet?
Yeah, there's a specific definition. I don't have it right in front of me at the moment, but I can follow up after this and just provide that information. It'll be in our CBTs as well. It's not a huge deal for us. It's not anything we were too concerned with.
And is it acceptable to retain certain documents longer than required? For example, we often get inquiries from the public regarding noise barriers on a particular facility and are able to refer back to the previous noise studies performed in their areas and provide the results?
So the right answer would actually be to talk to our legal staff to find out if that is appropriate. What folks do out there. I'll tell you, one of the things Cat Toolin tells us is many times what we get sued on is because of the records we have when we shouldn't versus the records we don't have when we should. So I think you just there's a reason we have a retention and disposal schedule for projects, and I would just say I would uniquely point you to your legal staff to discuss those specifics, but I wouldn't tell us, certainly in a statewide meeting, to not follow our policies and procedures.
And the next question, are we meant to retroactively load documents into SWEPT for projects that have already begun but won't be finished until after assignment?
So that'll depend. We want to look at where you are with each individual project. Hopefully, when we have the interface completed and everybody's been trained, that it's a very simple process. There's also ways that we can work with your staff to behind the scenes import a bunch of files and get them associated with a project. So I think it just depends on the unique project, where you are, what documents you have, and we can individually have the conversation about, is it appropriate to come in, and how would we do that, and who would do it?
And the next question is, what is the statute of limitations on NEPA actions, both EIS and CADX?
I have to look. I think they're all 6 years, but I don't want to answer that without checking, Jamie. So I just need to verify, but I believe you either file a limitation of claims or you pass 6 years, but I need to verify that and come back. I'm not definitive on that.
And the last question that just came in, you actually answered it previously. Yes, the PD&E consultants will be given access to SWEPT so that the project team can load the documents. It does not have to be done by the DOT PM.
Right.
And another question just came in. Will SWEPT be used for excluded projects such as FTA, FAA, etc.?
SWEPT can be used for those things. It's not the big push at this point, but certainly the infrastructure that we've set up, it doesn't matter whether it's an FHWA project, an FTA project, an FAA project, or a SEER. It won't matter for that. But obviously the focus of what we're doing today is for meeting the obligations as set in the NEPA Assumption MOU.
Oh, and another one just came in. Has FDOT considered requesting NEPA assignment for FTA projects?
Not at this time. We have not.